Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for another Film Fanatic show. Hope everyone's doing good. It is Saturday at 10:49. Pretty cold December morning. Pretty typical. Pretty normal. So yeah, this is a slightly unusual show, but I guess really any of these shows and most of these movies. Well, like lately, I've been covering more like quote unquote. I mean, I don't know. I Labels are labels, and they're good, and we kind of need them when we talk about things, but it's also like I think a little bit of a disservice sometimes. But lately I've been covering more quote unquote like bigger Hollywood movies because again I love all kinds of movies, but the main focus of this channel and my main love is the world of horror and exploitation. I just so this is a little bit of an unusual video. This is like part two of a movie that I've already talked about. But I just uploaded some new videos that I set as a premiere as premieres. So check those out. I want to thank the folks that always comment on these videos, and that's been a blast. It's been great. It's been a great year. The last couple of years with this channel, especially this year, 2024, got a lot more hits, a lot more traction, and it's a lot of fun. And moving forward, the thing that I want to try to do, but again, it's just a case of actually doing it and the logistics. But I like to do some more interview segments. But other than that, I'm always staying busy with doing these videos, and it's a blast. It's a lot of fun. But I just uploaded a bunch of new videos, and I set them as premieres. So stay tuned for that. Got some cool, you know, movies coming your way. 2000 Maniacs by Herschel Gordon Lewis, just a total classic. And then also the Slumber Party Massacre, which is a movie that has now moved to the top of my list as far as some of the best or one of the best slasher movies of all time. Just an amazing film. So yeah, today's show is on a is a little bit unique, a little bit different. I guess a slightly different angle. I'm always trying to bring some variety, and I'm always trying to bring things that are obviously directly related to film, but then things that are to the side a little bit outside of that box. Because for me, it's like movies are such a big crucial thing for me, and they really influence me. I mean, they inspire me personally, but they really influence me artistically. And like my band Quantum, like I've talked about a lot, where you know that band is really 100% inspired by films, and it's all you know everything I do with that band, everything from like I don't know, like the influences to like the arrangements of the music, of the tunes, the way I try to present them, and then the aesthetic or the way visually we like to try to do shows with theatrical element. It's all. I mean, the obvious. There's tons of musical influences, of course, but all of that stuff, especially at face value, point blank, it's all taken from movies. So it really is such an important part for me, inspiration, for inspiration to move forward, and it inspires me to create new things and try new things and take some chances. Even with pacing, like I've talked about this before, but even with films, as far as like, I like films that come at you fast and furious, but I typically always love films that create a really cool, thick and rich atmosphere, but they also are kind of considered like a slow burn kind of thing, of where it's a slow trickle of information, and it's you're slowly getting pulled into that web. To me, that is where it's at as far as as far as storytelling. For me, that is a huge. I mean, most people probably wouldn't realize that or don't care, and that's fine. But for me, like when it comes to like writing music for my band Quantum, that's one of the things I always think about. Like literally, I take that concept and I apply it to the music that I'm writing because I love that way of delivering information so much, like especially in regards to film. So I try to do that with the music that I write or create by having this kind of cinematic feel, but a slow burn where things can like hopefully if you have some good things established, hence like characterization or good characters, then you can kind of like slowly turn the heat up a little bit, and slowly have it percolate to where when it maybe comes to a climax or an exciting part, then it's like that much more exciting because there's a buildup and there's a contrast. As opposed to like everything hitting you super, super hard all the time, which I love too, but I think there's a great levity about trying to mix those ways of delivering ideas. I think it's challenging for the person performing the music or that work. I think it's more challenging to have a little bit of restraint, but then it's also I think if you nail it, it's more exciting for the audience because they're getting by that point they hopefully they're really pulled in, and then you can take them on for that, you know take them anywhere. So that's why I talk about film so much. So anyway, today's show is on an unusual thing because I did a show on a movie that I just love to death, and that is The Exorcist III. This movie is so awesome. I did a show, I think it was uploaded yesterday. I bought this beautiful Blu-ray edition of this movie. I just think this movie is amazing. One of the best. It's officially one of my most cherished Blu-ray movies that I own right now because it has so many. There's so many special features on this collection. There's two versions of this movie too, which is really really cool. There's a theatrical cut, and then there's also a director's cut, which I was not aware of when I bought this collection. I have a very well, it's not terrible, but it's not great. I have a pretty crappy DVD copy of The Exorcist III. And I think that this movie is like, again, check out the review or check out the video of this movie, but I think this is one of the best sequels, period, to a iconic classic, of course, The Exorcist. William Friedkin's Exorcist. And I just love this movie to death. But when I did the review, I had just started watching. There's a ton of special features. I just finished it last night. And it was like an hour and a half. Like, it was crazy. There's probably 3.5 hours of special features on here. But it's really good. There's a old, like, vintage when this movie came out in 1990, and there was a bunch of documentaries made about it. Which I had not seen or I was not aware of, so I was like, oh, that is awesome. So I watched that last night, or actually the night before. And then last night, there is a second disc. There's a theatrical version, and then there's the director's cut. And on the director's cut, there's all of these new documentaries that were just made. This was put out by Shout Factory, and it's great. It's really really awesome. But last night I finished the newer interview segments and documentary. It's kind of a loose documentary, but they have interviews with everybody involved with the cast, and it's really good. It's really really awesome. If I'm really into a movie, I love to find out kind of the nuts and bolts about it. How it came to be. What inspired it. I especially love watching documentaries or interviews about movies that I really love, but usually around if like say the movie is kind of a financial failure, or how it is taken by the public. Like initially it might not be very well received or trashed, but then people love it. Or, and I love how films kind of go through that, that those really, those, big time kind of financial pitfalls. Like one that I really love a lot. One example is Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. That movie was kind of despised when it came out, and I think it's one of the best, if not the best, in the franchise outside of John Carpenter's Halloween. And that movie is so radically different, but it was trashed completely. And then years later, you know it's become this big time favorite for you know people into like exploitation and cult movies and people like me, and it's become a classic, and it's been reissued on Blu-ray. It's become a legendary movie, and I love hearing about what that was like to like have so much riding on this movie, but then it's a failure, and it just going through that really terrible situation, and then seeing gold at the end of the rainbow, where years go by, and then the film gets traction, and then people are like, wait, this movie is kind of amazing. What were we thinking? What were we thinking as a public? So that's one of the things I love the most about watching special features. So I watched the most recent, and again, this was put up by Shout Factory, and I watched the most recent special features that I think were probably filmed and shot. It seems like within the last year or two, or the last few years. It seems really, really new. And I had such a weird experience watching this movie because pretty much like I sat through like I love this movie. I think it's awesome. I think it's just so great. And so I watched these documentaries about the film that were shot relatively recent, like I said, in the last probably couple of years. And it was a good solid 2 hours. And the entire two hours, the actors, everybody involved with this film pretty much just completely shit on their own movie. Like literally. And I was like, huh. Nobody, like literally nobody in the cast, nobody who worked on the special effects. There's interviews with everybody, involved with the production team. There's interviews with the actors. I mean, everything. And literally nobody says anything good about this movie. They all basically say that this movie is basically a total train wreck and a shit show, especially the last ending of this film. And I was like, wow, like this is wild. This is wild. I mean, talk about trying to sell your movie, and you're selling your movie, and it's got, this beautiful edition, but yet they're shitting on the movie the entire time, like pretty bad. It made me think of one of my favorite horror exploitation movies of all time. I've done a couple of shows on it, and it's a movie called The Spookies. That movie is one of the biggest piles of shit, but it is one of the most lovable piles of steaming shit you'll ever see or watch. It's an amazing movie. It's like the most gorgeous train wreck clusterfuck of a movie. But I love that movie to death. It's one of my favorite horror exploitation movies of all time. And that movie, I have that on Blu-ray, and I saw, like, after watching these special features, I'm like, there's so many similarities and parallels. Even though I didn't think that existed with Exorcist III, it was because with Spookies, it's pretty well known and well documented. Even though that movie is super underground, but a lot of people do know about it, and it's kind of gone on to become, again, a cult classic. And I have a beautiful edition of that movie, and I just love that movie to death. Just because it's so utterly ridiculous. And at times it like literally does not make sense, but it works for that movie. But the legendary stories around that movie, as far as people getting fired, directors being brought in, all of these reshoots, and just like, all of these people kind of getting screwed while they were making the movie, and people being brought in, and them just assembling all of this material that was like so unrelated, and then they tried to make a movie out of it, and then they released it, and you can see that it was a total clusterfuck and train wreck, but I just love it. But watching the special features on here, I'm like, wow, this is like they're like basically saying the same situation happened on that film, or on with the Exorcist 3, like in regards to like how I'm describing the behind the scenes kind of mess that Spookies was. And I'm like, holy shit, like it's crazy because they literally it was a weird experience watching this movie, and how they were saying how the director's cut, the original cut of this film is far superior than to this one, and the original vision. They were saying that Morgan Creek, the studio, was putting all of this pressure on Peter Blatty, William Peter Blatty, to kind of make this more into, you know, more of a exorcist film. Like originally, his intention behind this film was to make it more of a suspense thriller, and he didn't want to have I mean, in his own words, he didn't want to have girls with their heads spinning backwards and people spitting up pea soup. He wanted this to be a very different kind of feel, like a murder mystery film, and he wanted it to be kind of centered on this, on characterization, not really effects. But he wanted to have these horror elements, but he wanted it to be really subtle. And according to them, they were saying how the filmmakers, that there was so much pressure by the studio, that they felt like, well, this isn't really, we need to have some possession scenes. So they tacked on, basically they came in and took over, the executives. They kind of overpowered William Peter Blatty and basically said, no, we got to have an exorcism scene in this movie. So they like came in, took over, and put in the ending for this film, that where there is, because like I said in my review yesterday about this movie, it's a very slow burn. It's essentially a murder mystery film, but it does get into the horror realm and the possession realm by the very, very end. And I had no idea that that's the angle that they were saying on how that whole thing came about, because I feel like, again, for my opinions are assholes, like Larry Flint said, one of my favorite quotes, and I think by one of the greatest American patriots, if you will, Larry Flint, publisher of Hustler magazine, who defended the First Amendment and freedom of speech. He's always, my favorite quote has always been, opinions are like assholes, we all have one. So I thought, like, I love this movie. I thought it was great because there's such a slow build up, such a slow kind of percolating thing about this film. And by the time you get to the end, it's a full-on horror film. It's a full-on horror experience. And I thought that was great because it is very slow. It is very slow, meticulous. There's all this cool atmosphere. It's essentially a murder mystery film. And at times it does not even feel like it's going to necessarily be about a girl or kids or people becoming possessed by the devil or demons. And that's what I love about this movie, is that there's like this slow build up. And then I felt the ending was awesome. Like, it's so over the top and kind of ridiculous, but I think it's so great because there's like this build up, there's such a slow trajectory to that point, until you get to that third act. So I was really surprised by hearing about that. And again, that's why I decided to make this video, like a part 2 of The Exorcist 3, because it was such a weird experience watching the special features and then literally talking for 2 hours on how this movie was, just a total mess, and nobody liked the film, and they thought Nobody, even people who said somewhat good things, still kind of trashed it. And they, were basically saying on how, all of the good stuff was cut out of the movie, and there was just all of these bad calls made from the top to the bottom, particularly around William Peter Blatty's this decision to cut some of the original scenes because he felt they at the time they weren't very good. But the biggest part or biggest surprise to me was their claims of kind of the studio interfering and all these things with the insistence that this movie had to be about an actual exorcism. And this real intense kind of tug of war around that, which I was not aware of, and I didn't think that was even a thing. So it was like, huh, that's wild. But again, I think I saw lots of parallels between that movie Spookies, which I highly recommend. Amazing movie. I really want to watch it again. I've seen that movie so many times. And as much of with Spookies, as much of a disaster as that movie is, technically, all of those things I think ultimately work for that movie because I think it's I think all of the things that made that movie into such a cluster F ultimately at the end of the day make that movie such a classic. And if that's all true with how they are saying, this whole process was for them to make Exorcist III, well, I think at the end of the day, for me at least, it works because I think the movie's amazing. Very strange, very very strange. I know it's just a matter, it's an opinion, but very very unusual, very very surprising. And the other thing that they talk about, the other thing that's on here is that there is a director's cut. And I might watch it, but it's interesting because when I first opened this movie and I started to watch it. Typically, I will go for the director's cut. When I buy a film and I come across a director's cut version of the film, I will typically go for that version. That's usually what I'll gravitate towards. But I started to watch the director's cut first, and I thought it was interesting, but I didn't like it. I thought it felt like there's a few sequences where there's this like weird kind of voice over things over the film of where they kind of tell you what's going on, and it just felt, I don't know, it just didn't feel like there was any room for interpretation. You lost the feeling of it being a murder mystery film. It was weird. I didn't like it, and I watched maybe a half hour of it, and it was very different. There's all of these other scenes kind of put into the movie, like older scenes, and to me, it's too. Yeah, it's kind of like I got this feeling that through that version somebody was like leading your hand to all of the things, and there was less of a feeling of being able to make up your own mind as to what you're seeing and experiencing. Whereas the theatrical cut, there's a lot more mystery, and there isn't, you know, there nothing is so obvious. But so it's interesting. It really, really, I was taken aback by watching the special features last night on the view of everybody involved with this film around The Exorcist 3. But so I decided to make this second video around it. But anyway, it's an amazing film, really interesting, but an amazing special features collection. There's like, it took me 2 days to get through it, and it totally worth it. Fantastic movie. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.